A reading from the book of Revelation. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." Hear the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, when I was 14 years old, my best friend at the time, a guy named Rob, invited me to a movie for his birthday. And the movie was The Sting. So along we went with Rob's dad. And some of you will recall this movie with Robert Redford and Paul Newman in their younger days. Well, I don't need to give you the storyline of the movie, other than to say it's a complicated con job. So crooked swindlers swindle other crooked swindlers. So we're walking out of the movie, and I can tell that the adults around us enjoyed it, and Rob's dad was saying, "What a great movie with such a great twist at the end." So Rob's dad was saying, "Oh, what a great movie." And what I remember is the plot being way too confusing for my 14-year-old mind. And so I felt like the end of the movie was a letdown, because I didn't get it. And I was either too cool or too embarrassed to say, I actually didn't get it. Well, today we finally come to the final act of the biblical drama, Act 6. And I think I started this back in September, so it's taken longer than I expected, but here we are, Act 6. Part 1 of 2 parts. So, I want to start by saying that, like The Sting, Act 6 can be complicated. And like The Sting, if you follow and understand the twists of the storyline, then it's a great final act. But if you don't understand the complications and twists, then Act 6 can leave you feeling confused and disappointed, just as I felt at the end of The Sting. So my job with the next 2 sermons is to try to make Act 6 make sense. In fact, more than just make sense, but actually impact us, shaping how we view God, the world, and the future. So, here's my title for Act 6, The Age to Come, the incredible new creation. Or you've noticed so far in these various acts that I haven't necessarily always just kind of been happy with one title. So here's another title. Or God wins, and so creation wins too, including us. Regardless of the title, there are 3 key elements in Act 6 that I want to talk about, but today I'm just going to get into the first of these. But I need to warn you that to our cultural ears, 21st century ears today, Act 6 is not just complicated, but sounds weird. So, I will be unpacking, making sense of all this, including this weirdness. But there are 2 sides to this unpacking, making sense of this. One side is to get past the weirdness, to understand what Act 6 is deeply about. Right? That's one side. The other side is to continue to live with a sense of that weirdness as a challenge to our own ways of thinking, especially as a challenge to the fallacy of presentism, which is often where we get stuck in Act 6, especially in the book of Revelation. So, the fallacy of presentism. What on earth is that? Or what in the universe is that? So, fallacy means bad logic. Okay? So the fallacy of presentism is the following bad logic. It's the assumption that our cultural and intellectual, there's an L at the end there, intellectual age today, so our present age, where the term comes from, is the height of human accomplishment. And so every belief that humanity has ever had in the past can only be counted valid or true if it conforms to our standards today in the present. This assumes the present gets everything right and the past didn't get anything right. So presentism looks at the past 200 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, whatever, and says, can you actually believe that they actually believed that back then? So, about whatever topic. Or can you believe they actually thought those ways back then? How naive. So there is naturally a huge arrogance in this assumption. And it's an assumption we can all naturally default to, including me. That's not to deny in some ways, the present has learned things that the past has not. But that does not provide any basis for the fallacy of presentism. So, one way to kind of get past the fallacy is to think 200 years from now or 500 years from now, people in the future will look back at our age and say the same thing about us. Can you believe that back in the 2020s they actually believed that? Or that, they actually thought that was a good way to do things back then? Looking at how the future ages will look back on us makes us a bit humbler about how we look at the past. So our own age at every age, our own age as every age actually has its own limitations and blind spots and assumptions that will be critiqued in the future and actually can be critiqued by the past. The present can critique the past, and the past can critique the present as well. So, you see how the fallacy of presentism works, reflecting basically an arrogance in ourselves about the superiority of our present age. And this is a fallacy that people can bring to Act 6 of the biblical drama. And this causes some, not all, but some, of the confusion and sense of weirdness. So Act 6 requires us to remove the fallacy of presentism from our assumptions, which allows us to accept some of the weirdness of Act 6 as challenging us, while capturing the big point, the big message of Act 6, which I'll get to in a moment. So, let's get to those three, let's get to those three key elements of Act 6, but actually today I'm going to only focus on this first key element, the big picture. Here's the big picture of Act 6, the new creation. So we heard of this new creation in both of our readings earlier this morning. Both of those readings used this phrase, the new creation, from 2 Peter and from Revelation elsewhere. This new creation is the big picture of our ultimate future. So what on earth or what in the universe is this new creation? Well, this is the belief that all of physical existence will be redeemed from suffering and death and destruction, and somehow transformed by God, however God is going to do that. This includes, to quote Tom Wright, a renewal and perfection of our bodies rather than simply release from them. Renewal of our bodies. And this includes, as we heard from our reading in Revelation, God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. The new has come. In addition to these elements of the new creation, Christian theology also teaches that justice not achieved on earth in this age will in some way be achieved in the new creation. So now, is this vision just a kind of utopian, hyper-optimistic human construction? Well, of course it could be. Paul says this right up in 1 Corinthians about the resurrection. If Christ has not been raised, then your faith is futile. And we followers of Christ are the people most to be pitied, he says. So Paul names this possibility directly. The same applies to the new creation. Christians can tend to think of the resurrection as the central belief of Christian faith, but actually, equally central is the new creation. Both of these go together. They're two sides of the same coin of what God's big project is about. If one fails, they both fail. If one is true, they are both true. Of all the world's belief systems, and I've had the privilege of many years of being able to explore them, learn about them, experience them, I have landed on Christian faith as the most true account of the human condition and of human hope. Every human belief system requires some form of trust and faith. And for those who have placed their faith and trust in the story of God incarnate in Emmanuel, God with us in Jesus of Nazareth, then part of this trust is that the end of the story is indeed this new creation that we are told about. So let's be clear, we do not have any clarity on how this will be, how the new creation will happen. Paul says we look through a glass darkly, meaning basically our ability to understand the future is heavily tinted. It's clear, though, that this new creation will include some sort of new physics, which we do not understand. Now, this is now overlapping. Some of you may remember this. This is overlapping with a sermon I gave last year. So some of this may sound a bit familiar, at least this part. Because I had reason to mention this point in a sermon last year. Regardless. Some object that a new physics, somehow similar to yet different from what we experience in our current world, will be impossible. Well, I am a big admirer of the accomplishments of science. But on my computer at home, I keep a folder of articles that announce such and such a discovery that scientists thought was impossible because the current models didn't anticipate such a possibility. So my all-time favorite example of this is the discovery of something called quasicrystals. If you're in chemistry, this will be familiar. So for a long time, quasicrystals were considered just an idea, but actually impossible to exist in actual physical reality, in nature. And yet, quasicrystals were eventually discovered by a guy named Dan Shechtman. And when he announced his discovery, his claim was considered such a violation of the laws of chemistry that he was run out of his university, Johns Hopkins at the time, and he was run out of his professional society for claiming to have discovered these things. Well, eventually, the world of chemistry was persuaded, yeah, actually, you know what? Shechtman was right. And Shechtman would go on to receive the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2011. So I find the idea of new creation exciting. We don't understand it, but it is God's vision for us and promise that God lays out before us. It's not that at the end of the ages, the physical world disappears and only heaven remains, but rather that, as the Lord's Prayer says, heaven comes down to earth. Physical reality and the heavens become one, regardless of whatever eventually happens to the universe. Here I like to quote theoretical physicist and theologian John Polkinghorne. It is God's steadfast love that is the only basis of a true and everlasting hope. What is ultimate is not physics, but the will and purpose of God the Creator. God's final intentions will be no more frustrated by, say, cosmic death on a time scale of tens of billions of years than they are by human death on a time scale of tens of years. In other words, the ultimate future does not belong to scientific extrapolation, as valuable as that is, but actually the ultimate future belongs to divine faithfulness, to God's faithfulness to us and to creation. So, as I said earlier, our understanding of this future is nonetheless very limited, and yet our understanding is sufficient to get the point. And the point is that the future fully belongs to God. And God will redeem and transform and fulfill ultimate justice and salvation. The ultimate future belongs to divine faithfulness, as Polkinghorne says. So how the world gets there is another point. This is where the book of Revelation is often brought in, but interpretation of the book of Revelation is a challenge and often fraught. So I'm thinking of possibly arranging a reading group on this topic of how to read the book of Revelation, if this is of interest to people, because there's a lot of unhelpful material out there these days on the book of Revelation. So if that interests folk, let me know, and we'll see what we can set up. Anyways, there's much more to Act 6. And in my next sermon, I'll get into the other two central elements of this picture. But for today, though, I just want to give a sense of where Act 6 is heading. And that is both the resurrection of Jesus and the new creation together that give Christians hope and trust in God's ultimate redemption and justice for us and for the world. So that's what I want to say this morning. Next week, we'll have a chance to talk together about this, about parts 1 and 2, after the sermon next week. For now, I'm just going to invite you to please stand, and we are going to join together as we confess the faith of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth.
I believe